Good evening and welcome to another edition of Awaken the World. My name is Garhen, and this evening we're going to be talking about the 10 promises that Moses found on the mountain. It wasn't actually 10 commandments, okay? And there's some people who may be a little upset by this. I'm really sorry. I don't know what to tell you. Uh, that story in the Bible is just as believable as this one, actually. That's the way I think about it. The Ten Commandments were promises, okay? They were not rules that we had to follow. And that makes perfect sense. And we're going to be looking into that a little deeper here. It's really easy to understand where the confusion came about. And, quite frankly, it was Moses. It was his deal. He did it. And if we travel backward in time, and we're going to go all the way back to the base of the mountain. Now, if we believe the Abrahamic faith, that was Mount Sinai. Now, Mount Sinai, I've been there. It's a big mountain. It rises 2.2 or 2.3 kilometers up from the base of the mountain to the summit. It's a rigorous climb. It's a big mountain. Now, let's take a look first at Moses, okay, and understand that according to scriptures, he spent months fasting and purifying himself and preparing himself to go meet the God on the mountain. Funny enough, that sounds a lot like where Zeus used to hang out too. I'm pretty sure he was up there throwing down fire in the form of lightning bolts. And, okay, so here's Moses. He's gone through his purification rituals. He's fasted, and now he's making a rigorous climb with the equipment of the day, which would have been hardly, suitable at all, to be honest with you. He was actually putting his life in great peril to do it. And he would have arrived near the summit in a near delirious state from all the fasting and all the purification rituals. He simply would not have had the energy. He would have been literally ripe for his higher self to initiate an awakening experience for Moses. And that's exactly what he had. Okay, and up there on the mountain, in the conversation with his higher self delivered to him 10 promises. They weren't commandments. You see, Moses was on the path, but, he had a warrior side to him. He had a hardness to him, and he knew he did still. And he wanted more than ever to get past that last little bit of ego in himself. He really did. So his higher self relays to him the promises of what Moses is going to understand and naturally abide in as a result of him being on the path. And those are what we call the 10 commandments, but they're not. They're 10 promises. So, we'll just cover off a couple of basic ones, and I've pulled up the order here to keep them in order. So the first was, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not have any strange gods before me. Now, that promise was that once you are on the path towards your higher self, you will not go external. You will not go into strangeness. You will understand that God is you, that it's internal, within, that you're part of. There's no need to seek outside in a strange land when you have the familiar territory, the temple, right here. And that was a promise to Moses. The second was, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Okay? And what that actually was a promise that when you're on the path, you will understand that your very word is creative. And you will not use that creative word with undue care. And of course, we unconsciously do it all the time. And if you've looked at the Water of Life experiment, you'll understand why this promise is there. It's because when we don't abide in that promise, when we don't stay focused on our higher self, when we come from an egoic place, our words are creative unconsciously. We're using the creative power of the universe unconsciously and oftentimes with the intent to do harm to someone else. The third was remember to keep holy the Sabbath day. And what that is actually referring to, okay, when Moses was having the conversation with his higher self said, no matter what you do in the physical realm, you have to stay anchored in the truth of your existence. And that truth is that you're a highly powerful spiritual being having a human experience. Leaving one day to focus on your inner welfare, your inner being, staying in contact with the higher source that is you, within you, is something that you will naturally do when you're on the path. As a matter of fact, you will happily seek out that solitude and silence and connectedness. The fourth promise was when you are on the path to your higher self, you will honor thy father and mother. Now that does not mean bowing down to your parents' wishes. And that wasn't the point back then either. It had nothing to actually do with obeying your parents. Okay? What it had to do with is you will honor what you have come from. You will honor the realization that no matter what you think about your mother and father, you chose them. You chose your parents before you came into this physical realm, and you chose them to give you the ultimate experience for the growth that you wished to experience in your conscious spiritual evolution. And you will realize that. And that will allow you to love them and see them for what they truly are, rather than your egoic judgments on them. The fifth promise of the higher self to Moses, to make him aware when he was on the path, is that he would no longer have a desire to harm in his heart. Thou shalt not kill. And the reason Moses would no longer have that desire is the realization that indeed we are all one. We are all shards of that infinite sea of consciousness, all children of the Creator, all God's children. We are one. This was the beauty of the fifth promise. That we would naturally see the oneness and have no desire to kill another, as we would have no desire to pull a knife out of a drawer and stick it in our own belly. This is another promise of the sign you will see in yourself when you know that you're on the path and aligned with your higher being. Commandment number 6, thou shalt not commit adultery. This didn't work out so well with a lot of the big Jewish figures in the Bible, that's for sure, including Noah. But it actually isn't about committing adultery. That's not really what it's about. What it's talking about is that you will no longer have these base desires that we engage in unconsciously. The base desires of ego that are steeped in unconsciousness and in our deep, distant past, deep in our reptilian brain, but still sending very real subconscious signals into our more modern, evolved frontal lobe area. That commandment, again, was not a commandment. It was a promise that when you are on the path, you will not look outside of yourself. You will not give in to base desires unconsciously. Now, don't think that that foregoes making love to the person you love, because it has nothing to do with that at all. Number 7, thou shalt not steal. When you're in alignment with your higher self, you know that all your needs are met, that the universe has your back. The Bible and every other spiritual text says it over and over and over again. Just stay focused on what you're here to do. Realize the higher self, and everything else will be added to you. Look at the birds in the crows. You know, they're fed and looked after by God. The grass that grows in the field the next day to be born in the or burned in the stove. The flowers of the field, more beautifully arrayed than Solomon in all his riches. On and on and on again, we see the hints. Thou shalt not steal is not that you shall not steal. It's that you'll have no desire in your heart to steal, because you'll understand there's nothing you have need of, that everything is naturally provided for in the right measure. This is the beauty that Moses came to understand, that he would see when he was staying on that path in alignment with the higher self. Commandment number 8, which again was a promise. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. That comes back to understanding that your neighbor is simply you, that all of us are inseparable. And the truth of that, the truth of our existence, is more important than any petty squabble we may have between each other. We would not desire to try to get another one of our neighbors in trouble, because we would understand that in the same way our neighbor is going through things, we are going through things too. We have moments where we become unconscious. We have moments where we lash out, which is actually a cry for help. When you're in alignment and on the path to your higher self, you will love your neighbor, not try to harm him in any way. The 9th promise, thou shalt not cover thy neighbor's wife. This again relates to the base desires of ego, and its desire always looking outside of itself. And as soon as it has something, realizing that it's not fulfilling enough and not doing what it thought it would do, wants to throw it away and get a new one all the time. That's it in a nutshell. And men, unfortunately, are especially vulnerable to this, and we're going to speak about why in another video. But as men, we have to be highly aware of our natural reproductive instinct and understand that that has nothing to do with whether or not a woman may desire us, or whether or not, it really comes back to codependency. And we're going to talk about codependency in relationships in yet another video and article. But we'll leave that one around for now, alone for now. The bottom line is that the promise to Moses was that when you are on the path, when you are in alignment with your higher self, when you are beginning to realize that your consciousness and God consciousness are actually one and the same consciousness, you will not covet any other being of any sort, because you will see yourself, you will see the Creator in them. Same with commandment number 10. You're not going to want for anything. You will know that all your desires are met, that your needs are met, and your desires will become of a different nature, and they will be fulfilled. So you will not covet. You will not covet anything. You will not feel jealousy or anger towards another, because you will see where they are at and you will have compassion for that position. And when success comes to them, you will be joyful for their success. And when the downfall comes, you'll be there to help pick them back up. These were the 10 promises that Moses received from his higher self. It's really important to understand that God does not give commandments because that would actually violate free will. You can't say you have free will, but I command you not to do this. Because the very nature of a command is that you do not have free will. It's not a request. It's not a suggestion. It's a commandment. It's not so. They were promises. You know, on the way back down, here's the story again. You know, that mountain was over 2 kilometers up. And it was a big mountain. The base is huge. He would have seen what was going on with the Israelites camped at the base of the mountain from a long ways away. He would have had a lot of time to think about it. Now Moses was like most of us. He was partially still in the dark night of the soul. He hadn't fully come out into the light of his true being yet. There was still more to be burned away in the crucible of life. And the closer he got, the angrier he began to get. He saw what was going on and he realized that the people were so unconscious, so asleep, so quick to forget the trials that they had just come through, that they were willing to go ahead and engage in all the things that Spirit, his higher self, was just talking about. And he knew to go down there and try to talk to them about the promises, that they simply weren't ready for it. So he took those carved tablets and he broke them so that no one would be able to see that they were indeed the promises. And he instead delivered them as commandments. There was no maliciousness in him. He did it out of a good intent. His hope was that it would lead the people back to that path again. That if they weren't going to be conscious enough to want to go there, that setting up rules may force them to go in that direction, or at least push them the right way, or keep them in a little more narrow of a corridor. And of course, as history has proven out, commandments don't work. They just don't. The combined might of the 3 major religions spans 4 billion people. And here we are today, still doing the things we were doing to each other back then, except now we're doing it wholesale in huge numbers. Moses went to the mountaintop to have that awakening experience. He had to purify himself, and in that purification process, the ego's defenses are dropped. The ego is subdued because there's simply not enough energy available to keep the thought processes going at the usual rate. Next to digestion, this little buzzing thing in our head costs the most in terms of energy usage. It's unbelievable. More than your legs run, by far. The 10 promises are signs for us to look for in ourselves to gauge where we are on our spiritual journey within. You can look at each one of those and see how those signs and promises would apply to you, and see if there's areas where you're still straying away from that. And you don't have to feel bad about it. It's not a commandment. It's a promise to you. And in that, they become beautiful things. Not rules that will get you cast into hell if you fail to follow. Because if that's the case, we might as well just pack our bags and move straight to hell. It'd be a lot easier than waiting for it. This is Garhen with Awaken the World. I really hope you've enjoyed this this little video on the 10 promises to Moses. And namaste. Have a wonderful night.